Hi, and welcome to the podcast of the Frida Group. My name is Elias.
My name is Eleni.
And my name is Tanya, and we will be brushing up on Frida Kahlo's struggles, early life challenges, relationships, and the depiction of the film Frida, and also the about the film production. Now that we are pretty familiar with the Frida film that was directed by Julie Taymor, what did you guys think about the film? I really enjoyed it personally. I have always been a fan of Frida's art and always find myself buying her merch. I was quite surprised to learn so much about her disabilities and about the bus crash. I actually never knew that about her or the fact that she had polio. I learned about how her bus accident, which caused Frida's lifelong injuries, became the start of her artistic journey. I thought it was interesting how they did not disclose her polio in the film or her education as a med student.
I also really enjoyed the film. I honestly think that they did a pretty good job with how they depicted her life. However, I will agree that I was a little surprised that they didn't touch on how she contracted polio as a child because that was something that I knew about before watching the film. And also the fact that she was studying medicine and they didn't really address that.
I thought it was a great film. Also, I knew a lot about Frida prior to because I was always inspired by her art, and so was my mom. But I had a couple gripes with the film on how they depicted her. They lacked on some of her politics and fully portraying her bisexuality. But overall, I thought it was a great movie depicting her life, her struggle, her artistic ability, and even her impact on Mexican art and Mexican muralism.
Well, when we were doing the biopic for Frida, during my research, I had learned that Kahlo, at the age of 6, contracted polio, which caused her right leg and her foot to grow significantly thinner than her left one. And this is why Frida wore long skirts to conceal her leg. During her recovery from polio, Frida was left with a limp, which is a reason she used a cane in the film, in addition to the effects of her bus crash accident. But regardless of this limp, her father encouraged Frida to do sports such as wrestling, swimming, and soccer, which were quite unusual for a girl during that time. I wish they would have shown this a little bit more in the film, but I did read that it was because the film took years to make, and Salma Hayek had a lot to do with the budgeting and basically making this film happen, which is a possible reason why it wasn't too informative about Frida's details in her life.
That makes complete sense. I also wondered, like, I researched more about her life, and she honestly, like, it is crazy. She's done so much, and so much happened to her. That it kind of makes sense. I assume that they had to omit some details because of the length of the film, and of course, budgets. Ultimately, I feel like they did get the point across to the audience that Frida suffered a lot from her injuries throughout her life, and that her chronic pain was a major contributor to her becoming an artist. And a lot of her paintings were depictions of her pain. Speaking of her art and how she represents her pain and grief through her paintings, I think the film also did an amazing job addressing her infertility and grief over her miscarriages. We are told early on in the film that during the trolley accident, she was pierced by an iron handrail from the streetcar that entered her left hip and exited through her pelvic floor. And it is believed that due to the bus accident and the scarring that formed on her uterus due to it, which made it difficult for her to carry a pregnancy to term. This caused Frida to experience multiple miscarriages throughout her life, which would significantly, in fact, impact her physical and emotional well being. Her experiences with infertility and miscarriage then became a recurring and powerful theme in her artwork. She would go on to paint several self portraits depicting her struggle with the pain and grief, such as the miscarriage and Henry Ford Hospital. And her experiences and paintings are extremely meaningful and serve as visual expressions of her loss and grief. And these paintings also continue to resonate with women who have gone through similar challenges.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the few medical struggles that they displayed correctly or accurately was the bus accident and how that affected her fertility afterwards. One thing the film doesn't fully express was her mental issues, her mental health issues, and how that drove and inspired her art. She dealt with depression, anxiety, which led to her self harm and feelings of isolation, which I think the film displayed her unhappiness and her struggles, but it never dove deeper into her true like mental struggle. She was constantly depicted as the symbol of resilience and passion throughout the film, and in large part, she really was. Her political opinions and views on social issues were also somewhat brushed under the rug. So this depiction of her symbol of resilience and passion was just kind of displayed throughout the film without any backing of her politics and her true opinions on social issues. She fought for labor rights and was anti-imperialism. She was a feminist, but her strong connection with the Communist Party might not have bode well with audiences at the time of 2002.
Prior to the film, did you guys know about Frida's relationship with Diego Rivera? I had no idea that Diego Rivera had multiple affairs, but also Frida. She engaged in numerous affairs, just like her husband Diego Rivera. In the film, Frida starts having an affair after her life with Diego becomes more complex. She had both female and male lovers. I think the depiction of Frida's love life as a bisexual woman in the film is very brief and not effectively represented. I feel like it was more sexualized.
Honestly, I only knew that they had an extremely volatile and somewhat toxic relationship. I wasn't fully aware of the scope of like how he was a serial cheater and that their relationship involved so much infidelity. I feel like the depiction of Frida's bisexuality in the film is sort of directly tied in with cheating, which I don't really like that depiction. So I completely agree that it seems as though her queer like identity wasn't explored very thoroughly and that her attraction towards women was only shown as sexual and never deeper than that. I think that although the depiction of her bisexuality was a little misrepresented, at the end of the day, Frida did always choose to go back to Diego, and I think that might be why her other relationships were shown as mere sexual flings. I think the way that they represented their relationship is pretty accurate in that sense. It was extremely tumultuous and obviously consumed Frida's life. He was like the center of her universe. So much so that even in her death, her ashes are kept in a pre Hispanic urn shaped like a toad, symbolizing her eternal love for Diego.
I actually didn't know that part about her ashes being kept in an urn shaped like a toe. That's actually insane. That's wild. I actually, so I knew about the relationship prior to, because like I said earlier, growing up, my mom loved Frida, and she showed me a lot of her art, and she taught me who she was, you know, what she stood for, what the paintings that she drew, like the meanings of her art and so on. And she also gave high praise to Diego for his artistic ability and what he did for Mexican muralism, because he was a very famous painter at the time,
Mhm.
and still even in history. But she never gave him praise for who he was as a person because of the actions that he did. And like you said, he was a serial cheater, and it was a really toxic relationship between them. And I think the relationship was depicted truthfully in the film, but not to the extent it really was in real life. So like they depicted its toxicity, but not to the same degree. As well as Alfred Molina as the actor of Diego Rivera was really charming, I think, as the character.
Mhm.
And I think it kind of lessened the true character of Diego Rivera, or the true person of who he was. And like you said, I think that we never discussed her bisexuality outside of her affairs. And so it's kind of unfair to her to tie those two together when he was such a cheater and such a toxic partner. And I think they romanticized that relationship a little bit more than it should have. And like you said, I think their or her bisexuality was rather sexualized than it was more for representation.
Yeah, I feel like I agree with you on that. The part where you said Alfred Molina, he was like very charming in the film, and I feel like they just kind of normalized the relationship, like the toxic relationship that Diego and Frida had.
Agreed.
Um, mhm.
Yeah.
So I feel like brushing up a little bit again on her bisexuality. I feel like that Frida's relationship with women were sexualized and largely presented for the male's gaze. When the film was released, it was during a period when LGBT individuals were only beginning to gain representation. And also there was film with LGBT Q characters with stereotyping roles, but the film Frida had a bit of a different aspect of challenging the norms in the film. For example, there's a scene where she cuts her hair and she's dressing in masculine clothing that depicts something different as a bisexual woman. But the portrayal of her relationship seemed to undermine a bit the authenticity of identity and her sexuality.
I definitely agree. It seems as if they smoothed out her complex identity in order for the film to be more like palatable to a wider audience. Going off of that, I think that in order to properly appreciate this film, I think we needed to also talk about how the movie was made and what went on behind the scenes of production. So let's start off with the star of the film, Salma Hayek. Back in the mid 1990s, Salma Hayek was a rising Mexican American actress, and she actually really wanted to tell Frida's story. However, it wasn't an easy task. For years, Hayek fought to secure the rights, the funding, and the studio support for the film. She faced a lot of setbacks, including resistance from studios who doubted the commercial appeal of a bisexual, disabled, communist Mexican woman. However, despite the multitude of issues she faced, Hayek's persistence and dedication ultimately paid off, and her performance earned her an Oscar nomination for Best Actress.
Yeah, I think she really fought for the rights for this film. She loved and wanted to portray Frida like really deeply and strongly in a time that nobody wanted to. This was really her, and she was fighting against Madonna and J Lo for the rights of this film, but she ended up winning because of her persistence, and she secured access to Frida Kahlo's paintings and even approached Alfred Molina for the role of Diego Rivera. So she was already ahead of her peers who were also trying to search for the rights of this film. And this is during a time when, 2002, Salma Hayek was not famous at this time. Now looking back, she's, a really famous Mexican actress that we know now, but back then she was very unknown. And luckily she won the battle and she got to create the film, and she did a lot to try and portray Frida as best and most accurately as she could. She even shaved her upper lip, trying to grow thicker hair back to look more similar to Frida. And she even wore shoes that were different heights, roughly like a centimeter or two difference. That way she could really mimic Frida's limp. But that wasn't the end of the struggle creating this film. While this film was under production, Harvey Weinstein was one of her co-producers, and he sexually harassing her multiple times and even threatened to take the movie away from her if he didn't get his way. She eventually sued him for bad faith and not keeping his word. She won, and she got to continue filming. As she got the film rolling, he would consistently make remarks against Frida slash Salma's unibrow and insisted on her eliminating the limp and berated her performance. He even said, "I didn't hire you to look ugly," and that the only thing that she had going for her was her sex appeal, and that there was none of that in the film. He even threatened to end the film's production if Salma didn't agree to do a sex scene with another woman, and he demanded full frontal nudity, and she declined. I think there's another reason why, or this is another reason why they didn't explore Frida's bisexuality more, is because I think there wasn't a safe spot or a safe space for Salma to do so, because during the actual production of the film, it was being asked to be included for all the wrong reasons. Not for any representation, not for Frida's character, not for the story of the actual film. It was rather the objectification and the sexualization of the women in the film.
Yeah, that's actually so like interesting to hear. 'Cause I didn't know like all that stuff. I just did some like brief information about the pre-production of the film, but I do recall reading about how Harvey made several inappropriate demands of Selma and she was treated very poorly by him. His behavior created numerous issues and challenges for the production, which is why I'm really glad that in the end Selma got to represent and play Frida. The film was created during a time when representation within the film industry was increasingly emphasized, and Salma, who also produced the film, insisted on its creation and on playing the role of Frida. The insistence and the following production of the film reflect the changing times and the push for better representation of the Latinx people in film.
Honestly, I think the fact that this film took so much hard work to be created is pretty inspiring. It's crazy that decades after Kahlo's death, the forces that tried to silence her in real life, like the patriarchy, power, and politics, were all still at play in the making of her biopic. But the determination of strong women like Salma Hayek and Julie Taymor made sure that the film got made. And the film may not be perfect, but it still has real and raw emotion that mirrors Frida Kahlo's real life energy. And I think that that alone is something that Frida would have been proud of.
So overall, what did you guys think of the film?
Honestly, so overall, I would say that I give it a pretty good rating. I enjoyed it. Visually, it was pretty stunning, especially the way that her paintings were involved and incorporated into the certain like scenes as like transitions, and they sort of like brought these paintings to life. And I really loved that scene with the skeleton hospital after she was in the trolley accident, like the stop motion animation. That
Oh
was really
yeah.
creative and like really interesting. Like
Mhm.
when that came up, I was kind of like, I was like, whoa, is this the same movie? Like did it
Yeah, yeah,
change?
100%,
Yeah.
um
100%.
Super interesting, like super visually striking and stunning. And I really enjoyed like the direction that it was like was taken in. And I appreciate it. I feel like it was like at the time still like they involved a lot of what, I wouldn't assume, I wouldn't think that they could. Like I feel like, they definitely went through their struggles to depict what they wanted to. And although they couldn't depict it as truthfully and as they could or as they wanted to, I still think that it was done pretty well. And I give it props, and I think it is a pretty good film. I would watch it again, and I would recommend it.
Um, I I would say I pretty much it was my first time watching the Frida film. I really liked it. I think the visuals and also the animations that were incorporated too. I think that was pretty cool. I feel like this film made me want to learn more about Frida and like especially about like her political views and everything that wasn't mentioned in the film, like her being a medical student and how she contracted polio. Basically, everything that wasn't mentioned in the film made me want to research a little bit more about her and just like appreciate her and not really um, like normalize all the merchandise she's on and stuff like that, or
Yeah.
just it makes me like, oh, I know a little bit more about her now. So not just because of her image. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree.
100%. I really like the film, and I think as biopics go about people, I
Mhm.
think it did a pretty good job of depicting her life. And obviously, us asking for more when it comes to like her sexuality and her politics and the full description of like her childhood and like you guys said like her being a med student, like her dealing with polio, everything. I feel like that's us asking for more, and we should because she had such a, a struggle in life. But I think, because Hollywood has a tendency to like Hollywoodize films, and you never see true depictions of things fully. I
Yeah.
think they did a really good job, and I think Salma did a really good job, especially for it being one of her earlier like big platform films. So yeah, I really liked the film. I would recommend it to people. I think it was a really good film to just get to know more about Frida Kahlo, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for listening, and that was our podcast about the film Frida.